All right. Welcome to the live stream, everybody. We have an awesome show to you. Welcome to Forward Future Live. Today, August 8th, 2025. And what an incredible week. I am so excited to talk about all of the different things that were launched this week with a lineup of incredible guests. So first, we're going to start with the great Matt Wolf, fellow content creator, and Ray Fernando, another fellow content creator, live streamer, coder extraordinaire. And they're going to be joining us. We're going to talk about all the big launches, all the big news this week. And then later in the show, we have Saud Rizwan, the CEO of Klein, an open source agentic coding platform. Really incredible. They just raised some money. We're going to talk to him about GPT-5. We're going to talk to him about coding with agents in general. And then at the end of the show, we have the SWE Bench team. That is the team responsible for creating the SWE Bench benchmark that tests coding abilities of models. So we're going to talk to them about some new releases they have, as well as GPT-5 performance against their benchmark. So stick around for the show. A few notes. If you want to subscribe to our newsletter, go to forwardfuture.ai. We have news roundups. We have original pieces from AI leadership throughout the industry. So definitely check that out. And with no further delay, let me bring on my two guests, Matt Wolf and Ray Fernando.
How's it going?
What's up, guys?
Hey, good morning.
Welcome back, Matt, and welcome for the first time, Ray.
Greetings. Happy GPT-5.
Yeah, seriously. What a busy week. We're going to start with GPT-5. I'm glad you mentioned it right off the top. And that was really like one piece of the entire story of this week, but it was the major piece and it happened most recently. So let's get right into it. GPT-5 launched yesterday. It was a huge launch. I have my own thoughts on it. Matt Wolf, I want to go to you first. What was your initial reactions to GPT-5? How much have you played with it? What's your vibe check? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I feel like I was both underwhelmed and impressed at the same time. I don't know if it's possible to be both, but I feel like I was a little bit both. I was a little bit underwhelmed by the live stream. I don't really feel like the live stream did it justice and showed off the product very well.
Hour and a half.
Yeah, the hour and a half live stream. There was a little too much like extra like interviews and stuff that I just didn't feel like really needed to be there. They also didn't really need to announce things like, oh, you can now change the colors in your ChatGPT app, stuff that I don't think anybody really cares that much about. But having played with GPT-5, I've been really, really impressed, especially with the coding ability. Like I've gotten it to one-shot some stuff that I was just like insanely impressed that it was able to one-shot. Like my first experiment was I went in there and said, make me a clone of Vampire Survivors. And with one shot, it just built the game for me. And it worked with like level ups and like everything just worked perfectly. And I was pretty blown away with the coding ability of it. But I feel like their live stream itself, I was just kind of watching it going, man, I was really hoping for more. You know, we all remember when GPT-4 came out. And I feel like the jump between GPT 3.5, which we were all using in ChatGPT, and GPT-4 was just this like monumental leap, right? Like they were showing these demos of like drawing out a website on a piece of paper and taking a picture of it, and then that website just like coming to life. And they were just like showing things that just blew everybody's mind. And in this one, I just kind of felt like it felt like they were just showing off sort of like marginal improvements that, you know, nobody really feels like what they just saw is like groundbreaking or world changing. But again, having used it, I was really, really impressed with the coding ability. So yeah, both underwhelmed and impressed at the same time, but that's kind of where I'm at with it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you saturate benchmarks, when you're talking about single-digit percentage point increases on like Amy math or GPQA, right? They're not going to be as tangible of increases. But I think where I'm really seeing it is the intangible, the more subtle differences. But Ray, I want to hear what your initial reaction was. How do you feel? Are you in the camp that you were underwhelmed? Were you impressed? Now that you've been using it, you are very well known for live streaming a lot of your own coding. You do a lot of agentic coding. So what were your first impressions?
My first impressions were that the model is extremely steerable. And that's kind of one of the things that I'm kind of looking for as far as like intelligence for the model. We've had some very steerable models in the past as well, especially with Anthropic. And sometimes the extreme steerability can be clashing with the personality of the model itself, saying like, oh, I don't think this is the right thing. I'm going to do the right thing for you. And, you know, you have it overwrite files and various things. And in my use case, I specifically spent a lot of time inside of Cursor. And I could feel that there's a lot of integration efforts here. I basically had to go through, before I went live, I had like basically refactor a big bug that I had and look through fine details in my authentication stack. And it came through some amazing insights. And as an engineer, I'm basically kind of treating it as like another like senior experienced engineer to kind of go through the code. And so another insight I found is that it will, if you have an idea for what you want to do, the steerability is so strong that it will actually kind of sort of prefer what you want to do. But in its reasoning output, it'll actually output some stuff that says, I don't think that's a good idea, but and it'll actually output why it's not a good idea, and then kind of go towards your preference. And so that's something that I'm still kind of trying to work on. I felt it was really interesting that I haven't seen from other models where they actually just don't, like, this one is agreeing with you, but it's also outputting its thoughts. So I kind of want to pull more of that thread, and it was just kind of really interesting to play around with it.
And Ray, can you just give a brief definition of what steerability means?
Good point. Yes. Yeah. In terms of steerability, it's just the ability for the model to take instructions, output some stuff, and then say, I actually just want to focus on this smaller change or do something like that. And usually a lot of models can have their own opinion. And so kind of like driving, if you're driving a car and you tell an Uber driver you want to go to like, the airport, but on the way you say, hey, let's go ahead and stop by In-N-Out because the exit's over here. It's like, you know what? In-N-Out's not right for you. You should go to a saddle place, and it takes you to that place instead. It's like, I thought, it's like, you're hungry, right? I was like, yeah, I'm hungry and I want In-N-Out. I don't want, some salad place. And sure, it's faster to get there because it's on the way to the airport, but dude, what the heck? So that's like steerability. It's like, okay, I can actually say, we're going to go to In-N-Out, OpenAI is going to take me there. I'm going to get my burger. I'll be satisfied. And then I move on with my life. I don't have to re-explain myself. And that's kind of what I feel like some people feel, the models can gaslight them in that way too. So it's like,
and Ray, this feels akin to sycophancy, and basically what that word means is kind of the over agreeability of a model. When you tell it, hey, I have this terrible idea. You're not saying I have a terrible idea, but the one I always use is, I'm going to leave my family. I'm moving to Alaska and I'm going off grid tomorrow. Validate my idea. And there was a problem with GPT-4, I believe it was, maybe a couple months back, where it would basically say, that's a fantastic idea. You should leave your family and you don't even need any training to live in Alaska. And so that's sycophancy. It feels very similar to steerability. And it's funny because I think even during the live stream, but in the announcement blog post as well, they talked about how this model will push back on bad ideas more so than previous models. Sycophancy was something they were really measuring. So, Ray, is that kind of what you're feeling in the actual steerability of the model with regards to coding?
Yeah, I'm seeing that. And sometimes I was pushing it as a senior engineer. So it gave me a solution. And the solution like engineers are very opinionated. There's like 5 different ways you can achieve the same problem. And so I just try to give it a different problem and say, I think this problem is actually better. And I actually liked that because it actually pushed back on me. It's like, you know what? When you're talking about this problem, and I was specifically talking about a refactor, it was just kind of actually walking me through my own code. And I was like, I like this because a lot of code I've generated so far is pretty much, vibe coded in some ways. And so it just reminded me of what I was using in my software stack. And that's kind of why I'm really liking it right now, because I feel like it's more of a co-pilot. And I want to bring this in when I actually want to investigate deeper parts of my code and kind of like actually debug. And so that's kind of where I see a lot of potential here, especially with its integration within Cursor. And it's probably not going to be like my primary agentic coding, like sitting down Claude code replacement per se, as far as like, yeah, but I want to use it.
It's not replacing Claude for you.
Not to like generate or orchestrate plans, but if I have a session with Claude, I'm going to want to make sure I have a nice, good, like solid plan and architecture. And then I could take those pieces and then implement them, using GPT-5, because I'm going to actually get those finer details that I really want. And I want that like back and forth conversation as an engineer. And that's kind of what I'm really kind of curious about. If I'm just primarily just not going to do anything, YOLOing, I think that's going to be probably a different choice as far as like models. But yeah, because I want to be a little bit more hands-on, and I actually value removing code more so than like putting more code into my code base.
Yeah. And Matt, One of the, I guess, shocking parts of the announcement to me was that they're deprecating all of the previous models. So I really thought we were going to see a continuation of the O family of models, but basically they're all collapsing into this GPT-5, and they couldn't even help themselves. They did GPT-5 with thinking, GPT-5 Pro. So they still couldn't help themselves with the naming, but it is much simpler now. What did you think about the fact that they are deprecating, they're retiring all of these models that I guess we've kind of grown to know and understand how they work, and it's all being transitioned into a single model?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a smart move. I mean, I don't necessarily think that move was made for like, the more power users like us. I think it was made for the general public, and it's something that I know I hear a lot in the comments, and even just talking with friends out in the real world is that you pay for ChatGPT and it gets complicated because they're like, do I use 4.0? Do I use 0.3? Do I use 0.4 mini, 0.4 normal? Like nobody really knows which models to use, and I think we all kind of knew this was coming. I feel like
Yeah.
OpenAI has been hinting at the fact that they wanted to have this model router where you don't have to think about which model you're going to use. You're going to give it a prompt. It's going to know based on what the prompt is, what model is going to be best for it, and just sort of redirect it to the proper model. And I believe even on their on one of the blog posts that they put out, they actually showed sort of the equivalent. So if like you want to use 0.4, the equivalent of 0.4, or no, 4.0, sorry.
Yeah.
If you want to use the equivalent of 4.0, that's the same as GPT-5. If you want to use 0.3, that's the equivalent of, 5 Pro or whatever, right? Like they have this sort of like equivalency
Yeah.
chart where you can see that. But I think for like 99% of the world, they don't care. They just want to give their prompt and have it tell them which model to use. I mean, I even found myself with the old one going and asking the same question to 4.0 and then asking the same question to 0.3 to see which one gave the best response. And then sometimes even taking the combination of the responses and feeding them back in and saying, take these two responses and give me the best ultimate response from
Yeah.
them. Right. And now we don't have to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's also to your point, there's routing, and it's also a hybrid model, thinking and non-thinking. And
Mhm.
I really like that. Sometimes it thinks when it doesn't need to, but mostly it's been pretty accurate. And also, when you begin your prompt, there's a little button that says "Get a quick response instead," which was new. I wasn't expecting that. Have you appreciated the difference or noticed the difference between like a hybrid and then having to really like, for the previous models, let's say GPT-4o versus O3, and having to think about the differences there? What do you think about the
Yeah, I
hybridness
mean,
of it?
I think it's a super smart choice by them. So far, I've found that it's done pretty well. When I ask it a simple question that's likely already, in the training data, it's pretty damn fast, right? And then if you ask it a question where you expect it to think for a little bit, it tends to think for a little bit. Where it throws me through a loop every once in a while is when I expect it to think for a little bit and then it just doesn't, and I'm like, are you sure you don't want to think this one through a little bit better? But you can actually steer it, like Ray was saying, is you can actually steer it and say, think hard on this one, and sort
Yeah,
of
you can.
force it to
Yeah.
think as well.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
want to add to that
absolutely.
because
Go
I
ahead,
feel
Ray.
like we're entering a little bit of a newer paradigm in how we prompt things. And it's probably still to be discovered. And that's kind of what I'm doing now, just kind of removing any previous assumptions and just entering this new era. Like I'm a 5-year-old just born into this world and like, what is this AI thing? And I'm just picking up the product today. And I think that's really important, especially with the agentic coding that I was doing too. It's just like, okay, turn off all the MCPs, turn off everything. Let me just talk to the model and see what it gives me back,
Yeah. Yeah, and so look, I personally really like the model. It's very good. It's very fast, which I appreciate. And I think I'm maybe in the minority in appreciating speed as a quality of these models. A lot of people say, no, I will take quality over speed. 99 times out of 100, I will take speed over quality. I was using 4.0 for the vast majority of my use cases. It wasn't until I needed to do vibe coding or like really difficult planning for a complex situation in my life that I would start to use these thinking models. People thought I was crazy. They were going to O3 on every prompt, and that seemed crazy to me. So that's one thing. It is very fast. Another thing is, as we talked about earlier, the benchmarks are more or less saturated. There's Arc AGI, which is not saturated. That's kind of in a land of its own. I think SweBench is another one. We'll be talking to their team later today. But with that, it's like, how do you know if a model is better at this point? And it sounds weird, but you kind of just have to do the vibe check. You have to use it. You have to explore its boundaries, what it's good at, what it is lacking at, and just by using it. And I think Theo GG said this. He's post eval. Um, I actually think that's a quite a good point. We're at this point where we just need to use the model and see how it works because they're all getting gold on the International Math Olympiad. So what do you think about this, Ray?
I completely agree. I always highly encourage people, especially on my live streaming, that you have to go play with the model. You have to build this relationship where you talk to it and, have that back and forth. And every time there's a new model release, this is actually kind of your time to just use it, figure out what the workflow is and readjust. But the investment and time that you put into it does pay off because you can also, you're not tied to one provider. You can actually hand stuff between two intelligent models, which, I like to hand stuff between Opus and ChatGPT-5. And it's an amazing conversation. It's like, wow, I just brought two PhDs in the room and they're kind of now actually helping me produce a better plan. Just kind of like what Matt was saying earlier with his chats, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So Matt, I want to move on to the other release by OpenAI this week. It was completely eclipsed by GPT-5, but they did release a pair of incredible open source models. Did you have a chance to try them? And more importantly, how are they? What do you think about the release and OpenAI finally kind of since I believe GPT-2 putting out an open source model, which look, I appreciate they're putting billions of dollars of research into something that they're giving away for free. I always appreciate open source. So yeah, what are your thoughts on it? Have you tried it? What do you think about the kind of market dynamics in general?
Yeah, I have tried it. I've used it with LM Studio, which I know Matt you're a fan of.
Yep.
So I downloaded it and used it inside of LM Studio, both the 20 billion and the 120 billion. I'm on a
What are you running it on?
I'm on a M3 Ultra with 256 gigs of RAM. So I've got a crazy stupid overkill computer.
Is that a Mac Studio?
Yeah, it's a Mac Studio M3 Ultra. Yeah. So
Beast
I was running it
mode.
on that. The 120 billion, I was getting 40 tokens per second.
That's usable.
It's usable, yeah, for sure. On the 20 billion parameter, maybe closer to like 100 tokens per second. Personally, I was actually more excited by that release than I was GPT-5. Like I had high expectations for GPT-5 and I was expecting to be more blown away by GPT-5. I was more impressed by how capable these open weight models were than I was by the leap from what we were getting on the closed source models to GPT-5. When I started playing with these offline inside of LM Arena, I was just like, I was honestly pretty blown away by them. They were coding up games and apps for me and everything I would have expected to get out of like an O3 level model, I was getting from an open source or not open source, open weight model. And so I was really, really impressed with it. And I just love the idea now that I have this offline model that for me is almost as good as what I get out of just using ChatGPT straight up on their website.
Yeah. Yeah. And Ray, I want to ask you next, like, as I'm thinking about why they're releasing this open source model and how people are going to be using it, how they think about open source versus frontier and getting it through an API, are you using one of these open sources or one of the Chinese open source models that have come out that are all really amazing over the last few weeks? Are you using them for agentic coding? And if not, why not? Like, yeah, what are your general thoughts on open source for coding?
Well, for coding, not specifically because the value add is, kind of for me, it's like cost, right? So I have to have a really expensive machine, $5,000 to $10,000 or so, a Mac at least, right? And then a PC, a build out could be maybe equivalent to run a model that's something that's actually worth it, power costs and various things. And then when I do that trade off versus like a subscription, it's like right now it's still cheaper, in essence, to pay a subscription and to get the nice, really good, fast quality output, on the market. But separately from that, as an app builder who likes to build products, and especially on device stuff, I'm extremely peaked here, especially with these models because of how good they output at the O3 type of level. And the use case primarily that I'm looking at are like things that generate metadata on device. And with Apple and some of these devices, they're so power efficient that when you plug them into power overnight when it's charging, you can run all these tasks like in 8 hours when the user's sleeping. And you can start to do really cool stuff that you can't normally do, with devices. And it could just be offline. So you're not worried about connecting to the internet or hitting your servers and melting everything down. Because there have been amazing bugs that have been discovered in the OS where everyone hits a specific weather server at the same time, and it literally DDoSs them. And so if you have a model that's running on device, there's less load on your servers. You don't, as an app builder, you can just do these types of things that can actually make your app really rich. And so to me, I'm already starting to think about these really compounding effects. And what I was really impressed by at a first look at the model is like how good it is actually at writing and asking questions, and then even understanding what's in images and pulling that type of information out was super duper impressive with these models. And that's kind of why I'm getting really excited about, I can ship a model on device and do some really cool stuff to make my a better app experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually the image understanding of these open source models have been very, very surprising. So there was a tweet, I forget who posted it, but it was kind of a conspiracy tweet as to why OpenAI would release a cutting edge open source model and then immediately GPT-5. And the idea is essentially scorched earth, like we're going to release this thing for free, and it doesn't make sense to pay for any other AI service, inference service below GPT-5. Right? Because if you do, you just have it for free. And then GPT-5 becomes the only thing that you should be paying for. And so it was like a, 4D chess conspiracy move. And just want to get, Matt, your thoughts first on that. Do you believe that? Do you think it was kind of out of the goodness of their hearts to continue the open mission? What do you think?
It feels very Sam Altman to me, honestly. Like that sounds like it would be something straight out of Sam Altman's playbook, would be to make it so like, the best model on the market that you'd want to pay for is GPT-5. And then if you're okay using any sort of lesser model, the best lesser model is the open weight model that they released before it. I mean, to me, that feels definitely right out of that playbook, right? I mean, OpenAI has this, they have this tendency to overshadow any other big launch, right? Google.
Yeah, they do.
Google,
I swear they're doing it on purpose.
OpenAI releases something else. And Anthropic released Opus 4.1, and it was the absolute best coding model in the world for less than 24 hours, right? It was like that's just like the Sam Altman playbook. I think I do think he's very methodical and thinks through stuff like that.
Yeah, and Ray, like if we think about the Microsoft model, over the last, I don't know how long they've been around for, 50 years, I believe. They just had their birthday. They've done this so many times where they were a little bit late to a certain market. They would release something for free, completely saturate the market, and then dominate with upsells, cross sells, bundling, etc. Do you think that's what's going on? And by the way, OpenAI is not behind in any way. They are the frontier lab out there, right? They're always releasing the best thing first for now. So Ray, like, what do you think about this strategy? Do you think it was kind of, again, goodness of their heart type deal, or do you think they have more not evil intentions, but more competitive intentions, we'll say?
The competition is definitely really high. I think, to me, it's hard because I'm not like, I don't think like if you think probably like a evil comic book villain, there's probably a lot of parallels to like what people can put out there, right? So they can kind of imagine themselves this way. I just think about it more on, like, there's a reason why people prefer certain models for their specific work, because the tooling is really good or the experience is really good. And so I think they probably understand to some degree that if the model's really good at specific thing, people are just going to talk about it nonstop or not talk about it nonstop as well. So, in terms of like a media strategy, if you kind of know that, you can kind of start to really do some type of things. But at some point, once you put it out to the world, there's pretty much not stopping anything. You can't control my voice. You can't control your voices, right? Like, none of us are paid by any of these companies to speak about them in any positive or negative way. So it's literally our own opinions. And so, I think just in terms of, there is sometimes like oil spilling the water, kind of taking up the whole things. But there is a point where like a model is so good, it's just undeniable. And people are going to talk about it nonstop, especially if someone's talking about something else. So I think You know, like it was really interesting with R1 DeepSeek as a good moment, right? Like they came into the scene and people actually used it like, oh my God, this is really good. And then it kind of takes its own, you know, world at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's continue talking about coding models for a second. So as Matt said, Claude 4.1 had the best coding model in the world for about 24 hours. And so that's Claude 4.1. I just want to briefly touch on this because I want to talk about Genie 3, which really blew my mind, even though in the week it was kind of relatively small of an announcement, but it still blew my mind. So Ray, have you played with Claude 4.1? Claude kind of universally known or loved as the primary coding model, the best coding model. And so I want to ask you first, since you do a ton of agentic coding, have you used Claude 4.1 and what are your thoughts?
The Opus 4.1 model I've been playing around with, and it's really good at, you know, following my instructions, but it's also really clever at gaslighting me too right now. And I'm just trying to figure out how and why, because it would implement some solutions and be extremely sure of itself. And I like to review my code before it goes in, just because I'm still in this evaluation phase before I really trust the models. And just seeing that a little more often than I was ever seeing it with the Opus 4.0. And it could just be, I mean, this happened with Sonnet 3.7 as well. I feel like it's kind of that same vibe. And so I'm just kind of figuring out, is it my prompting? Is it something else? And, you know, that was kind of like a little bit of a red flag. You know, I kind of want my old Sonnet or Opus 4 back, but that's just my initial take right now as far as kind of what small sliver of the world I've been able to see here.
Sorry, I was muted. Matt, you too. I want to get your thoughts. Have you used Claude 4.1? Have you coded with it?
I have a little bit. Yeah. I mean, I don't go as deep down the coding rabbit hole as you both do, but I have written some code with 4.1. And to be honest, I found it pretty on par with ChatGPT 5. To me, they were both kind of giving me pretty close outputs as far as like design aesthetic and the apps actually functioning. And if you look at the SWE bench sort of comparison, I mean, they're pretty much the same, right? Opus 4.1, I think, got 74.1%, and GPT-5 got 74.5%. So it's like 0.4 percentage points better. But I think in my own real world testing, they felt about equivalent in my opinion. So I mean, I was fairly impressed with 4.1. I just think the big differentiator is just the cost, right? I mean, if we're looking at the API costs, I think 4.1 is like $75 per million output tokens, where GPT-5 is like $10 per million output tokens.
Yep. I'm going to bring up the cost right now. Here it is. So yeah, look at this. So Claude Opus 4.1, $15 per million input, $75 per million output. Here's GPT-5. I think one thing that really blew people away was how cheap GPT-5 is. So $1.25, that is a fraction of the cost of Opus 4.1 and a similarly capable model, $10 per output. And then we have GPT-5 Mini and Nano. Look at Nano. GPT-5 Nano, 5 cents per million tokens. I mean, intelligence is going to zero, 40 cents per million output. So Alex, you can stop sharing my screen for a sec. And so yeah, so there are the prices. Matt, please continue your thought.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to be coding with this stuff and they're both relatively comparable, you feel like 4.1 and GPT-5 are pretty close in their coding ability. You're obviously going to use the one that is 0.3% better, but you know, a fifth of the cost.
Yeah.
So you know, I think ChatGPT sort of wins that race just on cost alone, even if they are pretty comparable.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I want to move on to our next topic, and Matt, I want to start with you. So, Alex, if you could share my screen. So, Google released a monster this week, Genie 3. This is a fully simulated, controllable world generated by artificial intelligence. And when I say controllable, you can actually control it as it is generating. I can't really stress how cool this is. So as you're seeing here in this first video, this is somebody looking like they're riding on a jet ski of some sort, a lot of lights. They're, you know, going through the water. You can actually steer it. In the bottom left corner, the kind of timestamp is on it, but you see little arrow keys. That is them actually controlling However they're doing it, diffusion, I'm not actually sure. But that is them actually controlling the AI generation in real time, which is just nuts to think about. And Matt, I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about text to image, text to video, video to video. So first, I want to start with you. What were your thoughts when you first saw this? And have you seen anything comparable to this?
No, I mean, honestly, this blew my mind because we were seeing, things from like World Labs, right? Like Fei Li's company. And like you could move like 3 feet forward and then you'd get like this boundary where you couldn't move any further, right? And this just seems to be pretty unlimited. You could just kind of move around. It's got that consistency. I don't know if you remember, but like a year ago, some of these models, you would look in one direction, turn around, and then you turn back around and it'd be a completely different environment, right? But it's got this consistency now where no matter which direction you look, you can come back around to it, and it's got that same world. I mean, Jensen Huang said a few times now that like the future of gaming is going to be generated and not rendered, right? I think this is like the closest proof to that right here. Like we're seeing the potential of generated games where every frame of the game you're playing is generated in real time versus rendered out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because Elon Musk just put out a post this week, which we were going to get to in a little bit, but let's just talk about it now. He basically says all software in the future is going to be end-to-end neural networks. There is not going to be every single pixel you see on a screen will be generated. I've been talking about this for a while. I actually thought maybe for a minute I was wrong. But the more I see stuff like this, the more I really believe it. There is no reason that the operating system that we're using can't eventually be generated. I don't know timelines. I asked Satya Nadella about this, and he was like, "No, I think there's always going to be kind of a traditional element of the code." But I don't know. Ray, what do you think? Do you think we're going to get to a point where all software is going to be end-to-end neural networks, pixel by pixel generation?
I think it'll evolve. I think that's the first, like any great idea. Like, I think Thomas Edison with the light bulb took 1,000 iterations. I think that's kind of where we're at with AI. I think we get breakthroughs that kind of bring us to a new leap of thinking, and we have to remove the old leap of thinking. And we can go back to Tesla with where Andre Carpathy was, where he was there, when they discovered that neural nets can basically eliminate like almost 50% of their code or something like that in the code base,
right?
Or analyzing images, right? And making decisions in a self-driving car. Once they had that knowledge, they just kind of went to town and started ripping out code, right? And that's where you heard Elon Musk famously say that we don't need LiDAR. We could just use the image processing from the cameras.
And oh, sorry to interrupt for a second, Ray. It was interesting because it was just a few years ago where they still had handwritten code, human kind of curated code in their self-driving cars. And then one engineer was like, I think we can do better by just literally having end-to-end neural networks. And there's actually a term for this. It's called the bitter lesson. And essentially what the bitter lesson says is anytime you think that there needs to be some kind of human curation in a neural network, you're going to be wrong. And just scaling up the neural network is always going to be better. And so it does seem like that's the way it is, right, Ray?
I agree. And that's why they want more data, bigger data centers, more power, because the scaling laws are kind of insane. And so to go to these next leaps, you're going to need 100x more of everything, right? So that's why they've been collecting data for years, like a decade plus at Tesla, right? And that helps train all the models and all the different scenarios that they need for these decisions. So it's not that they need more coding, they actually just need more real world data. And maybe like that type of problem is kind of the same here, right? With these GPUs and things. But even just getting down to the bare metal part, with Apple and like their metal frameworks, and they had to rewrite a lot of that software to like expose interfaces for developers so they can make apps on iOS to make really good premium experiences. As a developer, you don't have to think about battery management and all these things. You just say, I want to draw this shader. I want to do this type of thing. So now think about exposing this to an AI system who knows how to like draw these pixels. And it's like, now I could talk to Apple devices because some engineer made a better, like a layer for the AI to connect the two together and talk to neural nets and draw pixels on screen in a more efficient manner, right? So I think that's kind of the tooling and other breakthroughs that we're going to start seeing. And just think of this, like we just discovered the base of this really large pyramid that's so large, it's like another planet. And then we got to add more layers until eventually we build our really giant pyramid, and it's just, we're at the very beginnings of this pyramid. It's so
Yeah.
large, we're just still kind of shouting at each other way across the way. That's
Yeah.
kind of what it
And
feels like. Yeah.
Some of
Matt,
this makes me wonder about like the some of the motives behind things like the oh, why am I drawing a blank? The Project Astra glasses, right, from
yeah,
Google,
yeah.
right? Like putting cameras on everybody's face walking around in the world. Is that more for our benefit, or is that more to train these world models and give them even more data to understand what the real world looks like? I mean, honestly, probably a mixture of both a little bit. Um, but yeah, makes sense why a lot of these companies are rushing to try to get out glasses with cameras on them.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, chat, let us know what you think. Do you think it's all going to be pixel by pixel generation in the future? And so I want to talk about this Elon Musk tweet. This is the one I was referring to. So what I mean is that there won't be code at all. Neural nets will generate the pixels, acoustics, and actuator command. Now he's, I think, referencing maybe robots here, but I
Seems
think
like it.
it's like more broadly applicable. So any input bit stream to any output bit stream. When do you think that will happen? And Tesla already does that for self-driving, yes. For real-time video generation with interaction, like a good video game, I'd say next year. Now, take that with a grain of salt. We all know Elon Musk's timelines are a bit aggressive, but he has been right in the long run many, many times.
Yeah. One thing that I think will be interesting about games is right now you can sort of with Genie 3, right, it'll render out a new sort of image with every frame that you move around in the game. I don't know exactly how that works when you start getting into like multiplayer yet. Like are other players going to see the exact same thing? Are you going to get consistency across
Right.
other players? Like to me this could be like obviously the metaverse hype was big 3 or 4 years ago. To me, this could be what the metaverse ends up being if they could figure out how to get that like consistent view from other users.
Yeah.
So I'm really
Yeah.
curious because I want to just add a little bit more color on the Omni model breakthrough that OpenAI had a while back, which is powering Sora and these other types of,
Yeah.
visual type of worlds. In that previously you'd have one specific model for images and one specific model for audio. And then with the Omni models, it pretty much in one model, it's building in essence its own world and giving us output and generations and things. And that's kind of like what I would call like a world model, which it can build the world in front of you pixel by pixel in some ways. And so when these enter other people's realities, they can start to speak a truth of some sort and share that truth across and start to generate the worlds, with some type of syncing between the two world models, right? So all you need is a model on each device, and then they can just share a small piece of information of like what their world is actually, some parameters of some sort. And if it's the same model that's deployed everywhere, I feel like that's going to be an interesting breakthrough for what we think reality is, right? Or whatever the reality that you're dreaming up together with a partner or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, that is very future thinking there, Ray. I love that idea. Let me
Well,
let me
if you
bring
ask
it.
Robert Scoble, they're building the holodeck, right? Everything with him is the
Everything is a
holodeck,
holodeck.
and
Yeah.
this is one step closer to the holodeck.
Yeah. And if you're asking Gary Marcus, we're basically building simple calculators and nothing more. And so I just want to touch on this last piece here. So one, it's just like mind-blowing thing is as you are actually getting the generation, you can prompt it and add things to the generation. So you can see here a man on a jet ski emerges, boom, going down there, a dragon lands in the water. I just like the science, the math, the amount of compute necessary for this, the technological breakthroughs. It's difficult for me to understand. It's difficult for me to grasp the enormity of what needs to go into something like this. So, yeah, I'm just blown away. Like, okay, so let me ask Ray first. Timelines. First, do you believe the future of video games are going to be fully generated? And two, what do you think the timelines are?
I'm not a gamer. I just want to honestly speak about that. And my exposure to like GPUs and like that type of stuff is really extremely limited. I come from like the product stack, the software things. But if I were to just take a rough guess as an outsider, kind of looking in, really, that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I would give it a good decade to see how things kind of shake out, right? What's the next decade going to do? The things take longer, and I'm just using Tesla as a perfect reference here because of world building, model building, and then decision making to output stuff. So we may get really quick demos, but what a lot of this software stack needs are those connector pieces. We need people at the low levels, at the middle, understanding and writing software there. And then we need people to integrate those pieces so that the AI can actually make, better decisions to connect to those, what I call them hooks into the real world. And then on top is like, who's going to actually orchestrate this? Who's a really good taste maker at a technical level to bring these into life? And that's actually probably most important. That's kind of why these people are going for 100, 200, almost $1 billion to these different companies, because you need to know all this like stack all the way up and down to have a good enough taste to, make that an advantage for something. So I'd say a good decade.
Yeah, it's interesting. You say taste, and I think you were saying something slightly different than when I talk about taste. When we have essentially the ability to create anything with models like this, text to image, text to music, text to text, there's just an abundance of noise. And for a human to have really good taste is going to become even more meaningful in the future, even more valuable as a skill set. Somebody who can curate experiences for other humans and pick needles out of the haystack of all of this noise to make a really great experience, I think is going to be so much more important. Matt, I want to get your thoughts on the same question as Ray. Do you think this kind of diffusion end-to-end neural net based generation for video games is going to be the future? And if so, what is your predicted timeline? Understanding we're all kind of just guessing here.
Yeah, I would say yes and no. I think it is going to be like a new genre of games. I don't necessarily know if it will be everything becomes generated. I think maybe like in 10 years, maybe everything's generated, but I think what we're going to see is some pushback from the gaming community. I don't think a lot of the gaming community wants like AI generated games. There's still something. I mean, some of the most popular games of recently have been little underground indie dev games. You look at games like Stardew Valley and Vampire Survivors and, some of these more popular games of recent years, they've been small, like indie creators that, hack together a game in their basement. And I think the game community still loves that kind of thing. And I think there's going to be quite a bit of pushback from gamers. But I do also think that's like a generational thing. I think as more young kids come up that like AI is native to them and AI has always been around, they're going to care less and less about how their game was made and more about whether it was fun or not. I think there's a sort of like current, like stubborn generation that will refuse to play like generated games. But I do think that generation will pass eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you nailed it, Matt. The game needs to be good. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what you're using. It doesn't matter the tools in your tool set. Ultimately, are you building a game that is engaging and fun and replayable, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So will we get GTA 6 before, or will GTA 6 be?
I was waiting for that,
network?
Ray. I was waiting for that. On current timelines, I think. I don't know, man. It seems like we're gonna get it next year. It was obviously
I love this
delayed,
comment from Nick. He's like, generative theft auto.
I'm curious, what do you think comes first, Grok 5 or GPT-6? Because Elon said Grok 5 before the end of the year.
Right. Yeah. So, but look, like you can apply a name of a model to anything. It could just be like some big iteration of Grok 4, or is it truly a new model? How do you distinguish between models? Yeah, like Ray, what do you think about that? Do you think like Grok 5 is going to be a truly new kind of step function better model than Grok 4, or do you think it's kind of just a naming game at this point?
I think it's a naming game. I still think that they're still cooking Grok 4 in the kitchen right now, and I'm still waiting for that Grok 4 code model to come out because I truly think that that's going to blow things away. I didn't get those steerability things that I really wanted from Grok 4 when I was giving it my prompts. And I think that's what they're doing right now. I think they just released it because they wanted to get in front of the headlines. And they're still working on this other steerability part, which is when you give it this prompt, does it follow your instructions thoroughly? Does it do all the different stuff? And there is a lot of intelligence in the 4 model. And I think it's going to actually show itself in the coming months, I hope.
Yeah. I feel like Elon's Grok 5 tweet was a little bit of a like, everybody else has some really big news to talk about this week. I need to sort of make sure I'm in the cycle as well. He put out his Imagine where you can turn the images into videos inside of Grok now. but nobody was like super impressed by it. So I feel like the GPT-5 tweet was a little bit of like, hey guys, we're still here. Look at us also.
Yeah, no, and of course he put out the ARC prize showing that Grok 4 is still dominant on the ARC AGI prize.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys saw that, but yeah, he's maybe a little spiteful kind of guy. I could see that. I'll say hyper competitive. Let's just call it that.
Yeah, I mean, OpenAI did omit the ARC from their the benchmarks that they showed off. So they are cherry picking which benchmarks they want to show the world for sure. But all the companies do that. All of them do.
Yeah, and of course there was GraphGate, which some of the graphs from the look. I got early access to GPT-5, so I got to see behind the scenes a little bit on the monumental effort it takes to get that model to market, to prepare all of the materials. So like, look, we're all human, we all hallucinate, and I get that as well. But guys, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today. This is so fun to talk about. Matt, thank you. Ray, thank you. You could check out Matt Wolf on Twitter. It's MRE Flow, and Ray Fernando is at Ray Fernando 1337, I believe, right?
Correct. Yes.
We're going to drop both of those. By the way, that was from memory. Kind of impressed with myself there. We'll drop both of those in the chat. We'll also link it in the description. Matt, Ray, absolute pleasure. Thank you. Please come back again.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
It's been
Thank
fun.
you very much. See you guys.
All right. So next up, we have a couple incredible guests from the Klein team. And if you haven't used Klein, it is an incredible agentic coding platform, open source, and we're going to talk all about it. You really get a ton of transparency with the context window. And let me just go ahead and introduce these guests and bring them on. First, the CEO from Klein, we have Saud Rizman, and we have the head of AI, Nick Posh. Come on the show, guys. Hey, guys.
Hey, Matt.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Hey, Nick.
Pleasure being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me, and congrats on the growth. Congrats on the raise. I want to talk about it all. Saud and I met. We met a few weeks ago in person, actually. I dropped by your office, got to say hi. We got to hang out a little bit, so that was really fun. But I want to talk all about Klein today. So first, maybe for anybody who they probably all know, but Saud, give a very high level breakdown. What is Klein, and what differentiates it from others on the market?
Yeah, Klein is an open source VS Code extension. It works kind of like Cursor's agent or Windsurf Cascade or Copilot agent, where you give it a task and it sort of goes off on this loop of calling tools and trying to accomplish the task in this sort of autonomous way. And it kind of takes over your editor, your terminal, your browser, your entire computer essentially to try to get whatever software engineering task you need to get done. It started off as this sort of like experiment to see how far we could push models like Claude 3.5 Sonnet at the time, and really use up like its entire context window and have it make like these request after request, which ended up getting really expensive. So a big part of the experience was to be really transparent about the pricing and using these models. So we're really clear about how much each request costs and how much the entire sort of task that the user wants to accomplish ends up costing. And so some people end up spending hundreds of dollars a day through Klein to get some really serious work done. But being able to bring your own inference and models, people can take advantage of like the free credits that Google gives away and things like that. So that's been helpful. And we're bringing it to JetBrains soon to sort of make it easier to use where developers are at. That's kind of been the ethos for how we've been building Klein, is just build something useful to how developers are using AI today. Yeah, that's kind of the long and short of it.
Yeah, and Nick, I want to ask you. So you Saad talked about transparency and pricing. Why is that important? I spoke to you, Saad, about it. I want to hear from Nick. Why is that important as an engineer? You're trying to decide which product to use. Am I using Klein? Am I using Windsurf or Cursor, which don't really have transparency of pricing? Why is that so important?
Yeah, no, I think this gets into like when Cursor came out, they were like one of the earliest kind of AI coding platforms for people. And I think at the time, people just weren't really ready for the real cost of intelligence, like the real cost of inference. And they made a lot of decisions where they kind of neatly packaged like a nice solution that was like perfunctory and that they could sell at like a $20 per month subscription for individual users. And since then, a lot of things have changed. And now people are a lot more accustomed to like they understand the cost of inference. And from the very beginning at Klein, we were always like, bring your own API keys. We don't, do any kind of juggling of inference. We don't do any like profiting off the margin. And very quickly, like our users found out that it's like on the one hand, Klein is like free to use, but in many cases, it's like one of the more expensive options on the market, probably like one of the most expensive. And I think people realize like that's actually okay. It's like totally worth it when, I'm spending a lot of time doing something manually. For me to automate even some time of that work, all of a sudden it starts to make financial sense, especially considering, some of these software engineering salaries. So people like on the one hand, people started understanding this, the landscape started changing, the models started getting more powerful. But because of these business decisions early on, folks like Cursor and like other people, I think they started finding themselves like in this trap because like of all the decisions they've made because of that one kind of like original sin, so to speak, of like, charging a subscription model, they ended up kind of going down this path of like, okay, well, now we have a bunch of users paying $20 a month. How do we give them a product that's like good enough while also not like making our ends meet and staying above water? And that resulted in a series of both business decisions and technical decisions on a technical side where they started building all these systems to cut costs, to maybe offload to dinky, cheaper little models, right? To start doing RAG to like, send less context. You might notice that it doesn't like send the full file. It sends like only a few lines at a time, kind of like piece by piece to the model to save as many tokens as possible. And the way these systems build, it's like almost like this technology ends up like enslaving you. It's like at a certain point you have this momentum and you're going down this path, and even if you want to change that path, it's like very difficult and very painful to do so. And in our case, we just don't have any of those pressures. We don't have any of that underlying mechanism forcing us in a certain direction, and we're incentivized to just be very context heavy, load all the context that the model needs to do its job as well as possible, to like the cutting edge capabilities. And yeah, like we don't have all these systems dragging us down. So like that's why we don't use retrieval augmented generation or like embedding search, vector search. That's why we don't have like a fast apply model or an instant apply model, because that's like another case where last year there was like this situation where models couldn't handle a very large context window, and they couldn't handle diff editing very, very well. And Cursor came out with this like instant apply feature, which was very good for the time that they released it. It made a lot of sense, but both business wise and technically. But since then, the models got so much better. It's kind of like the bitter lesson that these secondary systems with like secondary inference, secondary models passing off to like a small like fine-tuned Quen Coder 7B quantized model is just like not the best idea, because like, yeah, sure, it'll apply the code changes to your file, but there's going to be like maybe subtle hallucinations in there, like subtle bugs, and you won't even know if the tool call failed, right? Because it just outputs the full file. So anyway, I'll stop there. But yeah, I think that's why it's so important to be transparent about pricing and just let users front that and know exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and Nick, you said it so interestingly. You said the original sin of pricing, right? That really dictates and incentivizes the entire business structure. And I remember, so my previous business was a SaaS business, and we iterated through pricing a number of times. And there was a common sentiment in Silicon Valley that pricing for a SaaS company was the most difficult thing. It wasn't building the thing, it wasn't going to get the customers for the thing. It was literally deciding how to align yourself and your customers with pricing. And so, Saad, I want to talk to you a little bit more about like how did you have that foresight to know that this was going to be a problem? And since people are bringing their own API keys to use with Klein, you're not charging a margin, you're not providing inference yourself. How does Klein actually make money?
The foresight came from my own selfish desire and what I wanted in the product. Just in using the other tools at the time, I kind of got the sense that they were kind of giving me sort of a diluted experience compared to if I were to spend more than $20 a month on the inference, on the intelligence. So just in wanting to see how far I could push these models and knowing just how expensive it could get, I wanted for myself to make sure that I wasn't spending more than I was comfortable with, or I had some sense of what the spend was as I was using the product. If I wanted to put a break on things and make sure that I wasn't spending too much, and then plugging and playing different kinds of models, like DeepSeek for when I'm for users that are more cost conscious, or Cloud Sonnet that sort of strikes this balance between intelligence and affordability, and then Cloud Opus for when you want to throw something really seriously like difficult at it. I think there's sort of like different models and different sort of price points for the different sort of range of work that you need to get done, and you kind of develop like an understanding and a taste for what model works best for what kind of work. And for a lot of users, it's the economics of using a tool like Klein matter just as much as the performance. And so just being really transparent about that, I think, has been important for, one, making people comfortable with spending as much as they need to, and two, getting a good sense of when to use what model for what kind of work. And so the whole bring your own API key architecture allowed us to kind of open the door to other ways of using intelligence. So for example, people like plugging in local models using Ollama or LM Studio. And that hasn't really worked out too well because of how limited these models were until a few months ago. Really, is really when local model capabilities kind of took off, and being able to see how well it worked in something like Klein was like really empowering to people, in that they didn't have to sort of pay a third party or send data across the internet to get access to these kinds of capabilities. And it's just something really exciting to see for like the hobbyists in the space. And so, yeah, if we're not capturing margin on some inference subscription plan, how do we make money? And the answer is enterprise. That's kind of where the money's at traditionally, and they have these very sort of specific requirements and needs in using a tool like Klein, where we can sort of build software and services around the open source project in a way that we can package and sell it to customers that need it to use Klein at sort of a larger scale than your average developer sort of using something like Klein on side projects around the weekends.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. Again, like my previous business was a SaaS business. We tried to go bottom up for a while, and then we just realized no, enterprise is where the money's at. And so we had these $20 a month customers that eventually, it's so funny, it's so analogous to what's going on here. We would start losing money on them. And then we would go sell to enterprise, and they had a completely different set of needs, but they were paying us 6 figures a year. And their needs were not just give me more of the thing. Their needs were security, compliance, better support. So that's what you're talking about. That is what you're going to kind of wrap up and then go sell to the enterprise. Is that right?
Exactly. There's a lot of demand for things like simple things like team management and billing and invoicing and audit logging and role-based access control and just things to help sort of the admins and sort of managers in these organizations facilitate and onboard and easily use something like Klein for hundreds and thousands of team members.
Yeah. And Nick, I want to ask you something. GPT-5 was released this week. We also had a couple open source models. We had a bump in Claude to Claude 4.1. As head of AI, I'm sure you think about and kind of start to plan on these models coming, integrating them into Klein. So one, what are your thoughts on let's start with Claude 4.1 and GPT-5. What are your thoughts on them more generally? And then also, what does the process look like for integrating them into Klein?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, first, I think, we'll just talk about the capabilities of these new models. I think it's pretty remarkable how Claude 4.1 Opus dropped on Monday, and it's like no one is even talking about it anymore. Like no one even cares. Like it's like very odd. Like normally this would be like a very big moment. You know, it's always like, oh my God, Anthropic came out with their latest model. It's like incredible at coding, like this, and this. And I haven't really heard people really mentioning that. And I think part of that is just like the pricing of it. It's just more expensive than Sonnet 4. But I think with GPT-5 coming out, it really is like it's a really good model. It's very like heads down, not verbose. It doesn't yap. It just quietly works and does what you tell it to, almost to like a fault. Where it's like we notice like in our system prompt, like our system prompt is kind of like model agnostic, where it evolved over time through like all these different iterations through like Claude 3.5, Sonnet 3.7, now 4. And we noticed that it's like almost too good at following instructions, like very, very literally, and like doing exactly what you tell it. So there's like, you know, some ambiguity in our system prompt. There's some contradictory language. And because of that, there was like initially some issues with like, for example, GPT-5 had some issues like calling our plan mode respond tool in plan mode. And it turns out like we were working with the OpenAI team, and over lunch, they actually mentioned something really that struck me as like very, very interesting, where GPT-5 in their internal benchmarks is remarkably good at meta prompting. And what that means is like if you have some kind of problematic behavior that you're noticing, like, oh, you know, it's GPT-5 is not calling the plan mode respond tool very well, you can actually send your system prompt to GPT-5 and then send it the problematic behavior and then ask it like, okay, how do I, like, from your own perspective, how can I better instruct you to handle this behavior better? What are the minimum viable changes that I need to make to the system prompt while keeping it as intact as possible? How can I improve the system prompt to make this behavior better? And actually goes through and gives like exact examples of like where there's ambiguity, where you could like clean up some of the system prompts. And it also mentioned like a very interesting technique was like, hey, you could add this like additional parameter to your plan mode respond tool to basically like either give it, force the model to give you more evidence that it went through the exploratory phase of the plan mode to like make sure, like prove that it went through like these files by like listing which files it read ahead of time, or like add this like other flag that we kind of put in ultimately, which is like, oh, like is more exploration needed as like a way of like bypassing that. So yeah, it's like it's a really good model, and I think right now it is the cutting edge right now, especially at the price point that it's at. Right. So yeah, in terms of the process, yeah, like the process is always like, you know, lots of vibe checking it, obviously. That I think that's actually very, very important. And then we also have evals. We have benchmarks internally that we have. We have like our diff editing hard benchmark and a number of other benchmarks that we're working on. And we like evaluate every single new model release that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And Sad, I want to get your thoughts on this. Like the benchmarks, we were talking about this with the previous guests. A lot of them are saturated, especially like the kind of cutting edge math benchmarks, science benchmarks. And so when GPT-5 was released, a day ago, you look at it and it's getting a few digit percentages improvement here, a few digit percentages there. But when you start using it, it is the vibe that is noticeably different. And I don't know how to quantify that. I don't know how to describe in a really tangible way what that is. So Saad, what do you think about that? And how should we think about model benchmarking? And we have the SweBench team coming on after this, by the way. And so, but I want to get your thoughts. How do you test a model? How do you think we should be thinking about when a new model drops? How do we know how good it is?
Yeah, I never trusted the benchmarks until Claude 3.5 Sonnet. That was the first time I actually tested them out. I was like, okay, this actually deserves kind of the all the beating all the benchmarks and all the other models. And I guess like since then I've kind of like compared like I've always compared new models to Claude 3.5 Sonnet. I always felt like Claude 3.5 Sonnet was just generally good across the board and not sort of optimized for certain kinds of benchmarks. And we don't use these models the way that the benchmarks test them. So whenever we've like evaluated these models like internally or I've sort of test driven these things myself, I would always sort of throw like more practical things at the model and not so much look at if it was able to complete the task successfully or not, but kind of what its thought process is like, how long it takes for it to get there, how many mistakes it ends up making. One of the things that we've been looking at to kind of evaluate kind of the more practical strengths of these models is how good it is at tool calling and editing files using structured output. And so we actually found that GPT-5 is worse at diff editing, so using a structured output to edit a file than all the Claude models. So I think it's these models are good at like certain things, optimized for certain kinds of benchmarks. But like for the more practical work, it's like that you really kind of do have to like take a sort of like test drive these things yourself and sort of do the kind of work that you do for yourself that is kind of unique to your workflow and your career, and not really anything that you could really easily test on a generalized benchmark that tries to sort of like test for something that isn't uh, too predictable. So I know that Nick and our AI team has done a lot of trying to figure out how to properly evaluate these models in the context of a coding agent like Klein, where a lot of the use is sort of like the more practical work, and it's hard to kind of measure that in a benchmark. So Nick, do you have like any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. I think Matt nailed it when he said like everything's saturated. I think the state of open source benchmarks is atrocious right now. Every release, like even when they release like GPT 4.1 or GPT-5, I always notice that they like reference the Aider like polyglot diff editing benchmarks, which if you actually like look into them, they're like it's not actually a very good benchmark. It's like not actually testing the agentic capabilities of diff editing. It's like testing like this one shot ability to like optimize for a certain test and edit a file in doing so. And that's really like not realistic. That's not like actually how agents work in your day-to-day like real world tasks, right? And yeah, like all these benchmarks, like everything is saturated. Obviously all these model labs, they want the PR, they want to game these benchmarks. So there is this need for better real world benchmarks for real agentic workflows. And the problem that these frontier model labs have is, and I've spoken with like a number of them, they all like most of them are just like using synthetic data for all of this. There's there is this lack of real world usage, real world users coming with real world tasks actually trying to solve a real world problem in a real repository, where they end up creating like a lot of this like synthetic data to create these benchmarks. And that's, you end up getting this, right? Where it's like, oh, it performs great on SweetBench, or it performs great on this like other benchmark, but in reality the model just kind of sucks, for example. And when working like on your actual code base.
So I want quick answers from both of you, Nick and Saud. What is your default model that you're using for your own coding in Klein right now?
Claude 3.5 Sonnet.
Still?
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've thoroughly tested 4.1, you've thoroughly tested GPT-5, and you're still on 3.5 Sonnet.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's something about the way that they've optimized the Cloud 4 and up models to use thinking in a way that I found like it just doesn't work as well compared to Cloud 3.5 Sonnet. So yeah, I'm still in Cloud 3.5 Sonnet. I find that it gets a lot of the work that I need to get done really well. And like especially if you're kind of like maxing out the thinking budget using the Cloud 4 models, that can end up actually being more expensive. So I find it's like better and slightly more affordable.
Nick?
Yeah, that's actually, I didn't know that about you, Sad. I didn't know you were still sticking with
A dirty little secret.
crazy.
Yeah, you heard it here first.
Yeah. For me, I've been using GPT-5 all week. I'm pretty much like, I've swapped to using that as my default model. And, I think that really fits in my workflow, where I tend to think like very like architecturally. I try and come up with the architecture for whatever I'm trying to build ahead of time. And then I go through and tell client, I articulate exactly what I'm trying to do, the full architecture, the full spec. Now that I've thought it through, articulate that to client and have it follow exactly what I'm trying to build. And with some of these other models, like there's just like, they don't do exactly what you want them to do. Whereas with GPT-5, it just quietly goes down. It's like, all right,
Yeah,
right, like you want to use this spec, I'll just implement it exactly how you asked me to, and I won't stop until it's done, and I won't yap in the process. I'll just like do it. And like, for example, like yesterday, I one-shot this extension that I was just like, it was Slack really, really bugs me. I don't know if you've experienced this, but there's no like Discord style replies in Slack. And a lot of companies, like they have to use Slack because of like compliance and other stuff. And it just bugs the crap out of me, where it's like, I have to always create a thread to respond to someone. And then when you're in a thread, you can't actually reply to someone because you're already in a thread. And honestly, threads is like where information just like goes to die. It's like you get siloed off in another place, like other team members can't see the thread. And I just want like the Discord style replies. So I literally like in like an hour, I one shot this extension for Chrome that just plugs in, and I could just hit reply in the same action bar. It looks exactly like native to Slack, where I could just reply and it automatically quotes the user's message, it tags them, and I can immediately just start typing my reply and hit enter, and it just works, right, in any chat and anywhere. And I actually ended up like open sourcing that, publishing that to the extension marketplace like really quick yesterday, and I already got like 1 PR in like the open source repo. So it's just like really exciting. It's just like really, really fun to build this stuff.
All right, so GPT-5 for you. Saud, I want to ask you one last question. You just raised, talk a little bit about your fundraise. How much did you raise? What round is it? And then also, what do you plan on using that money for?
Yeah, we raised so a total of $32 million.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Across the seed and Series A, led by Emergence Capital and Pace Capital for the seed. And we've had a lot of demand for things like bringing client to JetBrains, the table stake enterprise features like we talked about before that are important for large organizations that want to use something like Klein sort of in a more serious way at that scale. So there's a lot of demand for a lot of enterprise software and features, and bringing client to more IDEs. That's just going to take a lot of work and scaling the team. And we've just been growing kind of like a rocket ship, and just growing our community, but also growing our team as well. We started off with essentially just me and Nick Bauman and Nick Pashier. Daniel Stigman was about 4 of us in January, and now we're close to 30 people. And
Wow.
we so yeah, we've been growing incredibly quickly, and we don't anticipate things to slow down anytime soon. So it's exciting times ahead.
Well, I want to say congratulations again. I am so happy for you, for your team, for the growth. Especially because you guys are building open source. That just makes me happy. So I appreciate all your effort there. Saud, Nick, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. We will, if you haven't checked out Klein, of course, like go get it. It's a VS Code extension. It's super easy to use. Get started in like under a minute. Very easy. Yeah, thank you both again.
Thank you, Matt. It was nice.
Next time I'm in San Francisco, I want to drop by again and say hi.
Thank you, Matt.
Absolutely. See ya.
All right, see you guys. All right, that was so cool. Okay, so now we have another incredible set of guests coming on now. We have the SWE Bench team. We have Ophir, Carlos, John, and Killian, all from the SWE Bench team. We're going to be talking about benchmarks. We're going to be talking about GPT-5 and everything else. Alex, bring them on. Hey, guys.
Hey, man.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Hello.
Hello. All right. So, yeah, busy week for you guys, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Also, I think trending with this, the chart was amazing. So lots of like unexpected responses on Twitter and everything. This has been really cool with the GPT-5
cool.
release. So
yeah. All right. So let's start. Just for those who don't know, talk about what SWE Bench is from a high level.
Yeah. Do you want to take it away?
You can go, John.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Basically 2 years ago, me and Carlos were hanging out at Princeton over the summer, and we had both kind of worked on past benchmarks. And at the time, human eval, I guess this is like dinosaur ages ago, was sort of the dominant paradigm for evaluating coding models. And so the two of us kind of put our heads together, and we thought like, okay, what's like a sort of a bigger leap, in terms of like testing the capabilities of models, having these coding tests be more grounded in a real world setting. And the workflow that we noticed that got us really excited was within the open source development community. There's this kind of issue PR dynamic. And what it means is like you're working with NumPy or Pandas, you run into a problem and then you post an issue on the GitHub repository. And then a maintainer will come along and they'll read the issue and they'll come up with a fix, which is captured as a pull request. And the pull request will some percentage of them will contain both a fix and also a set of unit tests to kind of validate, make sure that the fix is preserved going forwards. And if you just extract enough of those patterns, you get a really cool benchmark where you give the issue to a model, you give it the code base, like prefix state, and you give it a chance to modify the code base. And there's a lot of exploration for how you can do that. And then you end up validating whether the fix works with the associated tests from before. So that's a SWE Bench in a nutshell.
Yeah, and so SWE Bench is one of the gold standards for testing new models on its coding ability. I'm just going to put it very simply. I know it's much more sophisticated than that, but so when you look at a new model, so two new models dropped this week, 4.1 Opus and GPT-5. What is the process like when one of these frontier labs reaches out to you and wants to start benchmarking their new model against your benchmark?
Our code is totally open source, so they do it on their own for like their launch numbers. And then more recently, Killian can talk more about this. We developed Mini SWE Agent, which is this really small agent scaffolding for running SWE Bench. And so now we've started, every time there's a model that launches, when we can get API access, which is typically after the model launches, will run SweBench with Mini SweAgent to kind of get like an independent, measurement of every model's performance. And sometimes these measurements don't like line up with, the official numbers. I don't know, Killian, you can talk about like the new numbers from 4.1 and GPT-5.
I think I'm gonna hand that to Carlos. You evaluated 4.1, right? So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So right now, kind of just to expand a little bit on kind of what Ophir was saying with our new current, I would say, like headshot leaderboard. If you go to the website right now, so it's called SweBench Bash Only, and the main idea is when we first announced SweBench, we kind of we didn't want to restrain the way in which people tried to solve these problems. And so you can have whatever type of system, multi-agent systems, RAG systems, any type of approach. And now so when you look at SweBench with Bash Only, and that's what we saw, like for the first, year of SweBench, we had a lot of these very different types of complicated systems, which is a totally valid approach if you want to really maximize performance. But it became a little bit tough to evaluate just the language model. And we wanted to find a way to compare in just the kind of agentic abilities of a language model on SweBench without any of this extra help or like sophisticated scaffolding. And that's when we introduced SweBench Bash Only. And essentially what we do is we strip out the environment to be as minimal as possible. We get rid of all tools. There's no tool calling, actually. It's everything is kind of very traditional language model, string input, string output, simple interface. And that's good because it allows you to evaluate any model that like has any language model that maybe even if it doesn't support tool calling, you can still evaluate it using SweBench Bash Only. And so if you notice on SweBench Bash Only, there are no system names. Everything's just the language model, and that's because they're all evaluated in the exact same environment. And yeah, I think we notice in general performance is definitely a little bit lower because models are not going to have quite as much support from special tools or RAG systems or anything like that. That's all all of that's getting stripped away.
Also, a lot of these, just a small, tiny thing I'll add. Sometimes when the big frontier model developers put a new SweBench out, they'll do stuff like trying to solve the same problem 100 times and then having like an internal judge kind of try to pick which of the attempts to submit, and all kinds of like very expensive, very complex stuff like that, which kind of biases the competition in a weird, because then you'll have like one submission that costs like $100 per task, and one submission that they only try once, it only costs $1 per task. And so with Mini SweAgent, everybody's competing in the exact same environment. There's none of this try 100 times stuff. Everybody's like kind of doing the same stuff, and so it's a much nicer way to compare the models.
Yeah. So
I think another small aspect is also like sometimes model providers also exclude certain issues to run on, like on the benchmark.
Oh,
there's 500 issues in SweBench verified. But like a couple of them might be broken, a couple of them might be, there might be some issues, which slightly, up to a few percent points might change the score up or down. We think everyone should just evaluate on the 500 instances. If some are always failing, well, then that's how it is. But currently some model providers just exclude those and just kind of bump their score. Usually there's like an asterisk to these things. Obviously, we don't do that, right? Like everyone is apples to apples, really.
Yeah. So I want to talk about since SweBench is open source, how do you think model providers are thinking about not training on your data, and like why wouldn't they do that? Assuming like obviously they want the best model possible, training on your data is probably going to be not the best thing for their brand, but like I guess like how do you think about that generally, since all of your data is open source then, I assume?
Yeah, I would say it's inevitable that the test repositories represented in SweetBench are obviously in the training set. I think there's two things I would point to as sort of, I mean, when we built SweetBench, the purpose was never to say, if you do well on this benchmark, software engineering is automated. Like we're academics, it's about model capabilities. We want something that's trackable. It's correlated with real world performance. And so we've accomplished our goals. There's certainly, we acknowledge the criticism that like, oh, it's obviously contaminated. Like, it's like, we've heard it's overly representative of Django. I think all these things are true, but coming from our perspective, the goal of building a benchmark is to be able to reliably measure improvements in model capability. And that's always been our focus. If you look at kind of the offshoots of SweetBench, that's continued to be the focus, the theme of these things, like SweetBench multimodal or SweetBench multilingual, which we released recently. The second quick data point I'll add is that with our recent paper, we've kind of ventured more into the data space a little bit, which we think is kind of a big gap in the open versus closed source setting. If you train a model like a Klein 2.5 on all of the traces for trajectories that successfully resolved a SweetBench test issue. So like, let's just say 500 task instances. I grab like 100 of those that correspond to the model successfully resolving like Claude 4.1 successfully, and I train a student model on those trajectories. I don't actually recover 100% performance on the benchmark. So just because I train on like 50 resolved issues doesn't mean the model automatically resolves those 50 issues, which I think hints to one, the benchmark is still meaningfully complex. Like it's not just a memorization task. And two, that like, it's really interesting to think about the data mixtures that go in. Like it's not just a simple QA question where like, once you know it, it's baked into your weights as knowledge that you're done. So that's my 2 cents on it. But
I'll just briefly add that. Oh, go ahead, Killian, go ahead.
I mean, we also do the temporal breakdown, right? I'm not sure if it's still on the SweetBench website, but like we discussed it in all of the papers. Like if you basically compare model performance over time with like basically testing it on old issues, old GitHub issues that are in the benchmark versus very new ones that are after the knowledge cutoff, and we see if there's like an obvious trend line. And I think with multimodal, it was even the opposite. Like the models were doing much better with like very recent issues that were not like, that were definitely past the knowledge cutoff. So there's like, it's very hard. We can't trace it back to the model. It might just be that in many repositories also issues might get easier over time for whatever reason. So but we never like saw this very clear like trend line where we have like it suddenly drops to 0 after the knowledge cutoff or something. So yeah, it really still seems to be challenging.
So Alex, can you throw up the my screen real quick? I want to share something. Just give me 1 sec. Here we go. So here's SweetBench verified pass at 1. So let's just break it down. GPT-5 is seemingly taking the #1 spot. Let me know if any of this data looks inaccurate. Claude 4.1.
Yeah, you can open Killian's tweet. That's got our numbers for all these models. I guess you can compare it. This is
let's do it. I used GPT-5 to put this together, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
And while you're loading it, I would say like kind of what we mentioned.
Lieret.
I put it in the chat.
Yeah. One caveat is that for OpenAI, when they posted the numbers in the model card yesterday, out of the 500, they actually omit 23 of those instances because they say it's not.
That's what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, is there not an asterisk next to that? What's the, I mean, you talked about the reasoning for doing that, but that's just like cherry picking. Okay. Yes. Yeah. We're just nodding. Yes. That is what it is. Okay.
I think it depends on how it depends on how you want to interpret it, right? Like if you want to say like out of the total pool of solvable issues, we solved this in that many. I guess you can justify it. But
people shouldn't do that. People should always run out, give a number out of 500. But
Yeah.
we just did it for them, and these are the numbers that we have.
That's so kind of you. Okay, so we
That's
have
very
Opus
different,
4.
right? Because this is also like this is all the same system, right? Like when GPT-5 made their release and Anthropic made their release, they evaluated on different agents, like that are actually very,
Yeah.
very different. Like
Yeah.
so it's no wonder that these numbers are different, and it's also no wonder that they are lower, because there's one system that's not optimized for the specific language model, and it's also a very bare bones system, and we already alluded to that. But don't go out there and say like, oh, GPT-5, like they lied, everything is like it's not like that. But like just to put it in like for a real apples to apples comparison for one specific system, that's what we got.
All right, so looking at the lineup here, we have Opus 4 at 67.6%. Coming in behind it, GPT-5. So this is not Opus 4.1. Okay.
Yeah, I think the current number is not Opus 4.1 yet. Opus 4.1 is I think we still have to update the benchmark with that. Maybe it's running now. So
Okay. Sonnet 4 right behind it, then trailing Mini and Nano of GPT-5. Okay. Alex, you can take that off screen.
For comparison,
And-
Quen is getting 55.4, Quen 3 coder.
Wow. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
open source is catching up quickly.
Yeah.
And so the last thing I want to talk about with you guys is benchmark saturation. And like, when GPT-5 comes out, some of these benchmarks and looking at the improvements from like 03, we're seeing, single digit percentage increases on certain benchmarks. Certain benchmarks we're getting 100% on. Obviously, SweBench, we still have some headroom there. How do you think about benchmark saturation? And then also, once these benchmarks start to get saturated, how are you thinking about determining if a model's good or not? How do you personally test a model? What's the vibe check of the model?
We're just going to keep on developing new benchmarks. This isn't something new, right? Like before SweBench was around, human eval was this big thing that everybody was competing on, and then it got saturated. SweBench came by, and so we've made a bunch of steps towards that already. We have SweBench Multilingual, which is SweBench but in 9 different programming languages, and that's substantially harder than regular SweBench. It's all new repositories, all new languages. A lot of model developers were focusing on Python, and so when we launched Multilingual, I think performance on SweBench was in the 60s, and performance on Multilingual was in the 30s. And even now, I think the state of the art is in the low 50s on Multilingual. So that's super interesting. We have multimodal, which is bugs that have images in the bug description. So you got to kind of do text processing, but also image processing. And that's also in the low 30s right now. So we're well aware that, SweBench isn't going to live forever. We're always, trying to think of new ways to build good benchmarks. I think that benchmarking is definitely going to stay relevant. Like whatever you can do via vibes, you can formalize into a great benchmark. And
can I actually ask you about that for a second? So that it's I love that you just said that, because there are when I started using GPT-5, I couldn't describe tangibly what I was feeling with it. And so you're saying there is always a way to design a benchmark that can test against those things, right? So maybe I don't know if you have some examples of that, a steerability benchmark, a conciseness benchmark. What are those things that maybe the layperson would consider intangible, but you have ideas for how to benchmark against?
I'll just give one small example, then I'm interested to hear what the others think. But one benchmark that I'm super excited about is called AlgoTune. You can check it out, algotune.io. We give models a function or a program, and they have to just make it faster. And so that's something that we can iterate on forever and ever and ever. Because at first they take Python code and they write it in Numba, which is like this just-in-time compiled code, and then they can write it in C, and they can try to write it in assembly at some point. So we're starting to think about more kind of open-ended benchmarks that will just keep on being optimizable forever. But there's a lot of answers to your question, Matthew. So yeah, I'm interested to hear what the other people think.
And I guess there's also always the cost axis. So maybe we should have also included that with the tweet that GPT-5 it's cheaper than Sonnet 4, and GPT-5 Mini gets 60%, rather than the 65 on our run, which is very close, but it costs like 1/5 of Sonnet 4 or GPT-5. So things are also getting cheaper. So like that's one axis, and there's like number of steps taken, which to some extent correlates with like user experience and like, well, how long until stuff actually gets fixed. Like that might be also kind of anti-correlated, because I don't know, GPT-5 kind of sometimes issues very complicated commands, like very complicated, like it does like wants to like basically one-shot the problem, which might not always be the best user experience, like depending on what you're doing. So I think those two axes, like number of steps taken, cost spent, like they're like very impactful for like real world applications, right? So it's less than just this 1%, more than just this 1%.
And one thing I'll quickly add is like when Carlos and I were thinking about this benchmark originally, like in 2023, RAG was like all the rage back then. And if you thought about it, you could recast this problem as a RAG problem. But the reason that Carlos and I mean, that was our initial baselines. But the reason Carlos and I didn't do that was because we had this underlying philosophy where we want to try to offload as much of like things needed to do onto the model. So for example, you could make the choice to like design the retrieval pipeline and then basically reformulate it into like a slightly more complicated code generation problem. But the philosophy was like, well, why not make it look for files on its own? Like, why not make it like determine what file to edit, determine what the reproduction script? So I think like a general philosophy that maybe has guided our team in particular is going forward to just more and more the burden of the scaffold, which like a lot of I think things that we already, like Carlos and Killian alluded to with this leaderboard, move all of that extra like human prescribed engineering to be like the things that the model has to do.
Yeah.
Like we don't come up with tools, we don't come up with extra pipelines, extra like you should do this step and then do this step. It's just we try to give you like increasingly so like the minimal infrastructure required to connect a language model to a code base or a task, and then more and more just like say like the model has to figure it out.
Yeah, like we really put that to the extreme, I think, with our mini SWE agent. It's really just like 100 lines scaffold, or like 130 or something. And every time something comes up, if like an exception happens, we literally just tell it to the models. It's just like a while loop. Try doing the next stuff. Something goes wrong. It's just appended to the message of the language model. The language model has to do everything by itself. No tools, just a bash. There's no support for any errors. There's just a prompt, and it can run shell commands, and it still gets cooking.
Right. I mean, that's really just testing the core intelligence of the model rather than the scaffolding around it. So I really appreciate that approach.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for joining me. John, Killian, Ophir, Carlos from the SWE team. I'll drop all the links in the description. I'll drop it all in chat as well. You can check out SWE yourself. You could see who's top of the list right now. You can also run your own models against SWE to get some feedback on the benchmarks. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
It's been a pleasure. See you next time. All right. So it's been a full episode today. We are probably going to be doing this every Friday. So I hope you join us next Friday. We have some awesome guests. I'll share that later, early next week. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for all the comments and chat. And I'll see you next week, everybody. Bye.